On a clear morning, a man climbs up a cliff after hearing a distant roar. He finds an adult lion hanging between two rocks, struggling not to fall into the abyss. Using ropes and wood, the man takes a risk, grabs the lion's paws and pulls with all his strength. The lion collapses to the ground, breathing heavily, and without looking back, disappears into the forest. At sunrise the next day, the man opens his balcony door and locks eyes with 3 lion cubs sitting on the lawn. Hiding among the trees, the same adult lion watches, not taking a single step. For a few seconds, the world simply stood still. Love stories with animals. Then subscribe now and never miss one. Thanks for following us. Now back to our story. That sunny morning in the Colorado Rockies, Jake Harrison woke up like any other day, completely unaware that his quiet life was about to change forever. The seasoned wildlife photographer had chosen this remote cabin specifically for its isolation, nestled high in the mountains where the pine forests met the alpine meadows. At 42, Jake preferred the company of his cameras and the silence of nature to the chaos of city life back in Denver. As he opened the window of his rustic cabin, breathing in the crisp mountain air that carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, an unusual sound pierced the morning stillness. It was a low, muffled roar mixed with what sounded unmistakably like desperation, echoing from somewhere among the rocky outcroppings below. Jake paused, his coffee mug halfway to his lips, straining to hear more clearly. The sound came again, weaker this time, and Jake's photographer instincts kicked in. He'd spent the last 3 years documenting the wildlife of this region, and he knew every call, every cry that belonged to these mountains. This was different. This was distress. Grabbing his high-powered binoculars from the wooden table by the window, Jake stepped onto his deck and began scanning the steep slopes that dropped away from his property. The morning light was perfect, casting long shadows that made the rocky terrain look like a natural amphitheater. He methodically swept his gaze across the cliff faces, looking for any sign of movement or the source of that haunting cry. Then he saw it, and his breath caught in his throat. About half a mile down the mountainside, on a narrow ledge that jutted out from the main cliff face, a large mountain lion was trapped. The magnificent cat was pressed against the rock wall, its powerful body trembling with exhaustion as it tried to maintain its grip on the precarious outcropping. Below the ledge, the mountain dropped away into a ravine that disappeared into shadows. Jake lowered his binoculars, his mind racing. Mountain lions were common in this area, but seeing one in distress like this was rare. The animal appeared to be an adult male, probably weighing close to 150 pounds, and from what Jake could observe, it seemed to be caught between 2 large boulders that had somehow shifted, creating a trap. Without hesitation, Jake rushed back into his cabin. His years of living in the wilderness had taught him to be prepared for emergencies, though he had never imagined he would be mounting a rescue operation for one of nature's most formidable predators. He gathered rope from his gear closet, along with a sturdy hiking harness he used for his more adventurous photography expeditions. His toolkit provided additional hardware, and he even grabbed several wooden planks from his small workshop behind the cabin. The hike down to the trapped animal took him nearly 30 minutes, navigating carefully through loose scree and around massive granite formations. As he got closer, he could see the situation more clearly, and it was worse than he had initially thought. The mountain lion had apparently been traversing the ledge when loose rocks had shifted, creating a narrow crevice that had trapped the cat's hindquarters, while leaving its front paws desperately clinging to the edge of the drop-off. Jake approached, slowly, speaking in low, calm tones. He had photographed enough wildlife to understand that sudden movements or aggressive postures would only escalate the animal's panic. The mountain lion's golden eyes fixed on him, and Jake was struck by the intelligence he saw there. This was not the mindless fury of a cornered animal, but the calculated assessment of a creature that understood it needed help. Setting up his improvised rescue system took careful planning. Jake secured his rope to a sturdy pine tree about 20 feet back from the edge, then used the wooden planks to create a lever system that might help shift the rocks without causing them to fall and injure the trapped animal further. Every movement had to be precise, calculated, because one wrong move could send both the rocks and the mountain lion tumbling into the abyss below. The work was exhausting. The thin mountain air made every exertion feel doubled, and the constant awareness that he was working mere feet from a powerful predator kept his adrenaline surging. Sweat soaked through his flannel shirt despite the cool morning temperature as Jake carefully positioned his makeshift lever against the larger of the two trapping stones. The mountain lion watched every move, its breathing labored but its eyes alert. Occasionally it would try to shift position, testing whether the rocks had loosened enough for escape, but each attempt seemed to wedge it more firmly in place. Jake could see scratches on the animal's haunches where the rough granite had scraped away fur and skin during its struggles. After nearly 2 hours of careful, methodical work, Jake finally managed to create enough space for the mountain lion to extract itself. The moment came suddenly. 1 second the cat was trapped and helpless, and the next it was flowing like liquid across the rocks, landing safely on a wider part of the ledge before disappearing into the forest with surprising grace despite an obvious limp in its rear leg. Jake sat back against the cliff face, his whole body shaking from exhaustion and the adrenaline crash that followed. He had just rescued one of North America's most dangerous predators, and the animal had not shown even a hint of aggression toward him. It was as if the mountain lion had understood that Jake represented help, not threat. The hike back to his cabin felt surreal. Jake kept replaying the encounter in his mind, wishing he had thought to bring his camera equipment. But somehow he knew that photographing the rescue would have felt wrong, like exploiting a moment of profound vulnerability. This had been about preservation, not documentation. As the sun reached its zenith and Jake finally made it back to his property, he was surprised to realize how much the morning's events had affected him. He had always felt connected to the wilderness, but this experience had created something deeper, something that felt almost spiritual. He had intervened in the natural order, not to dominate or control, but to restore balance, and the mountain lion had accepted his help with a dignity that humbled him. That evening, as Jake sat on his deck watching the sunset paint the peaks, in shades of gold and pink, he found himself scanning the tree line, wondering if he would ever see the mountain lion again. The logical part of his mind told him that wild animals moved on, that the cat would disappear into the vast wilderness, and their paths would never cross again. But something deeper, some instinct honed by years of living close to nature, whispered that this morning's encounter was just the beginning of something much larger than a simple rescue. The mountains held secrets, and Jake had just become part of a story that was only beginning to unfold. Dawn broke over the Colorado peaks with the same serene beauty that Jake had come to cherish during his 3 years in the mountains. But as he opened the front door of his cabin to collect the morning newspaper delivery that never came this far up the mountain, his eyes needed several seconds to process what he was seeing. There, on the small clearing that served as his front yard, were 3 small mountain lion cubs. The tiny cats, no more than a few months old, sat in a perfect line as if they had been placed there deliberately. Their spotted coats gleamed in the early morning light, and their oversized paws and ears gave them an endearing, almost comical appearance that contrasted sharply with the reputation of their species. But what made the scene truly extraordinary was the presence of the adult male mountain lion that Jake immediately recognized from yesterday's rescue. The massive cat lay in the shadows beneath a cluster of aspen trees, watching the scene with alert golden eyes. Jake froze in his doorway, hardly daring to breathe. In all his years of wildlife photography and mountain living, he had never encountered anything like this. Mountain lions were notoriously solitary creatures, and mothers typically kept their cubs hidden deep in the wilderness, away from any human contact. Yet here they were, 3 vulnerable babies sitting on his property as if they belonged there. Moving with the slow, deliberate motions he had learned during countless photography sessions with skittish wildlife, Jake slowly descended the 3 wooden steps from his cabin's porch. The cubs showed no fear, which both amazed and concerned him. Their lack of natural wariness around humans could be dangerous for them in the long run, but right now, their trust felt like an extraordinary gift. The largest of the 3 cubs, a female with particularly bold markings around her face, actually approached Jake's boots and began sniffing with intense curiosity. Her litter mates followed suit, and within minutes, Jake found himself surrounded by playful mountain lion cubs who seemed to view him as nothing more threatening than an interesting new feature of their environment. From his position under the aspens, the adult male continued his silent observation. Jake could see that the animal's limp from yesterday was less pronounced, though he still favored his left rear leg. The fact that this powerful predator felt safe enough to bring his offspring to Jake's property spoke volumes about the level of trust that had been established during yesterday's rescue. As the cubs explored around his feet, tumbling over each other in typical kitten fashion despite their wild nature, Jake noticed something that immediately shifted his attention from wonder to concern. The smallest of the 3 cubs, a male with a distinctive white patch on his chest, was favoring his right front paw. When Jake knelt down for a closer look, he could see that the paw was swollen, and the cub's gait was distinctly uneven. The injured cub seemed to sense Jake's focus and approached without hesitation, almost as if seeking help. When Jake gently extended his hand, the young animal sniffed his fingers and then, to Jake's amazement, allowed him to carefully examine the injured limb. The paw was definitely swollen, possibly from a fall or getting caught in something, and the cub's willingness to let Jake touch the tender area suggested significant discomfort. Jake glanced back at the adult male who had risen to his feet but made no move to interfere. If anything, the mountain lion's posture seemed almost encouraging, as if he were granting permission for Jake to help his offspring. The intelligence in those golden eyes was unmistakable, and Jake felt a profound sense of responsibility settling over him. Making his decision, Jake carefully scooped up the injured cub, surprised by how readily the young animal accepted the handling. The cub's fur was incredibly soft, and its small body radiated warmth against Jake's chest. The other 2 cubs followed, as Jake slowly walked back toward his cabin, their mother's training in staying together clearly taking precedence over any natural fear of human habitations. Inside his cabin, Jake had accumulated a substantial first aid kit over the years, necessary equipment for anyone living in such remote territory. He had treated everything from his own cuts and sprains to injured birds and small mammals that occasionally found their way to his door. But this was his first mountain lion patient. The injured cub submitted to Jake's gentle examination with remarkable docility, purring softly as Jake carefully cleaned the swollen paw with warm water and antiseptic solution. The injury appeared to be a strain rather than a break, possibly from an awkward landing during play or exploration. Jake applied a small amount of anti-inflammatory gel that he typically used for his own hiking injuries, then created a soft bandage using gauze and medical tape. Throughout the treatment process, the other 2 cubs explored Jake's cabin with the fearless curiosity typical of young predators. They investigated his photography equipment, knocked over a small stack of books, and even attempted to climb onto his dining table. Their antics were so entertaining that Jake found himself laughing out loud, a sound that seemed to delight the young animals even more. When Jake finished treating the injured paw, he carried the cubs back outside, expecting to find their father gone. Instead, the adult mountain lion had moved closer to the cabin and was now lying directly in the shade of Jake's front porch, as if he had decided to make himself comfortable while waiting for his offspring. The reunion between father and cubs was touching to witness. The adult male carefully sniffed each cub, paying particular attention to the one Jake had treated, and seemed satisfied with the care his offspring had received. The cubs clustered around their father, rubbing against his powerful frame and competing for his attention with soft, chirping sounds that Jake had never heard mountain lions make before. As the day progressed, Jake found himself settling into an unexpected routine. The mountain lion family showed no inclination to leave, and Jake discovered that his property had somehow become their temporary sanctuary. He set out bowls of fresh water, which the cubs eagerly investigated, and even shared some of his venison jerky with them, though the adult male preferred to hunt for the family's primary meals. By afternoon, Jake had documented the extraordinary visit with his cameras, capturing images that he knew would be treasured, regardless of whether he ever shared them with the outside world. The photographs told the story of an impossible trust between species, a connection that defied everything Jake thought he knew about wildlife behavior. But as evening approached and Jake reflected on the day's events, he began to notice details that troubled him. The adult male mountain lion bore additional injuries that Jake hadn't observed during yesterday's rescue. There were scratches along his flanks that looked fresh, and a small cut near his left ear that seemed inconsistent with natural hazards of mountain life. More concerning were the cubs themselves. While they were healthy and playful, they showed signs of recent stress. Their mother was notably absent, which was highly unusual for such young cubs, and their willingness to trust a human so completely suggested they might have been exposed to people before, possibly under circumstances that weren't entirely natural. As Jake watched the mountain lion family settle in for the night around his property, he couldn't shake the feeling that their arrival wasn't simply the result of gratitude for yesterday's rescue. Something had driven this powerful predator to seek out human protection for his vulnerable offspring, and Jake suspected that whatever that something was, it represented a threat that was still out there in the wilderness, waiting. 3 days had passed since the mountain lion family had made Jake's property their temporary home, and what had initially seemed like an extraordinary but brief wildlife encounter was beginning to feel like a permanent arrangement. The cubs had claimed various spots around his cabin as their own personal territories, with the smallest one, whom Jake had started calling Patch due to his distinctive white chest marking, showing a particular fondness for the sunny spot beside. Jake's woodpile, the adult male, whom Jake had begun thinking of as guardian, maintained his vigilant watch from different vantage points around the property. His behavior suggested an intelligence that went beyond typical animal instinct. Guardian seemed to be constantly scanning the surrounding forest, his ears swiveling to catch sounds that Jake's human hearing couldn't detect, his golden eyes tracking movements in the distant tree line that remained invisible to untrained observation. Jake had fallen into a routine of morning wildlife photography, capturing the remarkable family dynamics of his unexpected guests. Through his telephoto lens, he observed behaviors that challenged everything he thought he knew about mountain lions. The cubs played elaborate games that seemed designed to develop hunting skills, while Guardian participated with a patience that seemed almost human in its deliberate care for his offspring's education. But it was during one of these photography sessions that Jake first noticed the signs that would change everything. While focusing on capturing images of the cubs at play, his lens caught something in the background that made him pause. There, clearly visible through the magnification, of his 400mm lens was a section of forest where branches had been broken in distinctly unnatural patterns. The damage wasn't consistent with animal activity or natural weather phenomena. These were deliberate cuts made by human tools. Lowering his camera, Jake studied the area more carefully with his naked eye. From this distance, the damage was barely visible, which explained why he hadn't noticed it before. But once he knew what to look for, the signs became increasingly obvious. Someone had been moving through these woods recently, and they hadn't been particularly concerned about concealing their passage. Intrigued and slightly concerned, Jake decided to investigate. Guardian seemed to sense Jake's change in mood and rose from his resting place under the pine trees, his posture alert and questioning. The cubs, still engaged in their games, remained oblivious to the tension that was beginning to build in the air. Jake gathered his hiking gear and set off toward the damaged area, surprised when Guardian fell into step beside him. The mountain lion moved with fluid grace despite his healing injuries, and Jake found himself oddly comforted by the powerful predator's presence. If there was danger in these woods, he couldn't ask for a better companion. The hike to the damaged trees took about 20 minutes, and with each step, Jake's concern grew. The path through the forest showed clear evidence of human traffic, but not the kind left by hikers or legitimate hunters. These tracks spoke of people who were trying to move heavy equipment while avoiding established trails. Bootprints in the soft earth were deep and showed the tread patterns of serious hiking boots, the kind used by people who expected to be doing extended work in rough terrain. When they reached the area Jake had spotted through his camera, the extent of the damage became clear. Someone had cut a narrow corridor through the forest, wide enough for people to pass through while carrying large items, but narrow enough to be difficult to spot from any established hiking trails. Fresh wood chips at the base of cut branches indicated this work had been done recently, probably within the last week. Guardian's behavior became increasingly agitated as they explored the makeshift path. The mountain lion's hackles rose, and he began making low, growling sounds that Jake had never heard from him before. Whatever scent trail Guardian was following, it was clear that these particular humans represented something dangerous in the mountain lion's experience. Following the cut path deeper into the forest, Jake discovered something that made his blood run cold. Hidden beneath a camouflage tarp and concealed behind a natural rock formation was a cache of equipment that clearly didn't belong to any legitimate outdoor activity. There were heavy-duty cages, large enough to hold substantial animals, and a collection of devices that Jake recognized from his research into wildlife photography as tranquilizer guns and capture nets. The equipment was expensive and professional grade, suggesting this wasn't the work of casual poachers or amateur thrill seekers. Someone had invested serious money and planning into establishing this operation in the remote Colorado wilderness. Jake photographed everything he could see without disturbing the cache, his photographer's instinct for documentation overriding his growing alarm. Guardian remained on high alert throughout Jake's investigation, his powerful body coiled as if ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. The mountain lion's obvious familiarity with the scent trails in this area suggested that he had encountered these intruders before, possibly more than once. The fresh scratches on Guardian's flanks that Jake had noticed suddenly took on a more sinister significance. As they made their way back toward the cabin, Jake's mind raced with implications. The timing of Guardian's arrival at his property with the cubs was beginning to make sense. The mountain lion hadn't brought his offspring to Jake out of simple gratitude for the rescue. He had brought them to the one place in his territory where he had observed humans behaving with kindness rather than hostility toward wildlife. The realization that he had somehow become a safe haven for animals fleeing from human predators filled Jake with a complex mixture of pride and concern. His isolated cabin had been chosen as a refuge, but that meant he was now potentially in the path of whatever threat had driven Guardian to seek protection for his family. Back at the cabin, Jake was relieved to find the three cubs exactly where he had left them, still engaged in their endless games of chase and pounce. Their innocent playfulness provided a stark contrast to the evidence of danger that Jake had just discovered in the forest. These young animals had no idea that their very existence might be threatened by the equipment hidden just miles from their temporary sanctuary. Guardian settled back into his watching position, but his demeanor remained tense. Every few minutes, his head would snap toward the forest, tracking sounds or scents that Jake couldn't detect. The mountain lion's hypervigilance was beginning to affect Jake's own sense of security. For the first time since moving to this remote location, Jake found himself checking and double-checking the locks on his cabin doors. That evening, as Jake reviewed the photographs he had taken of the hidden cache, he faced a difficult decision. The responsible course of action would be to contact local authorities and report what he had found, but doing so would likely mean the end of his extraordinary relationship with Guardian and the cubs. Official investigations would bring people, vehicles, and disruption to this peaceful sanctuary that had developed around his property. More troubling was the possibility that reporting the cache might actually put the mountain lion family in greater danger. If these were professional wildlife traffickers, as the expensive equipment suggested, they would have backup plans and alternative locations. Forcing them to relocate their operation might result in them taking immediate action to capture any valuable animals in the area before law enforcement could interfere. As Jake wrestled with these considerations, he noticed that Guardian had moved from his usual observation post to a position directly between the cabin and the forest. The mountain lion's message was clear. He sensed something approaching, and he was prepared to defend the territory that had become his family's refuge. Jake checked his watch. It was just past sunset, the time when the forest typically settled into its evening rhythm of nocturnal awakening. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the wilderness around his cabin seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something that was moving through the darkness between the trees. Jake woke to an unusual silence that immediately set his nerves on edge. After several days of becoming accustomed to the soft sounds of the cubs playing outside his cabin at dawn, the complete absence of their typical morning activities felt ominous. He rolled out of bed and moved quietly to his window, peering through the curtains to scan his property. The three cubs were huddled together beneath the large pine tree, where Guardian typically stationed himself during his watch duties, but their father was nowhere to be seen. The young mountain lions appeared alert but motionless, their ears constantly swiveling as if tracking sounds that Jake couldn't hear. Their behavior spoke of animals who had been warned to remain hidden and quiet. Jake dressed quickly and stepped onto his porch, immediately noticing that the usual symphony of morning forest sounds was also absent. No birds sang from the branches, no squirrels chattered as they searched for breakfast, and even the wind seemed to have stilled. The forest around his cabin felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for some unknown danger to pass. Moving carefully to avoid startling the cubs, Jake approached their hiding spot under the pine tree. Patch, the smallest cub with the white chest marking, looked up at Jake with eyes that seemed far too mature for such a young animal. The cub's expression conveyed a clear message. Danger was near, and everyone needed to remain very quiet. Jake knelt beside the cubs, speaking in whispers as he gently stroked Patch's head. The young mountain lion leaned into the contact, seeking comfort, while his siblings pressed closer to both Jake and each other. Their trust in him was absolute, but their fear was equally obvious. Whatever had spooked Guardian enough to leave his post and warn his offspring to hide was serious enough to override the cub's natural playfulness. The answer to Guardian's whereabouts came in the form of movement at the edge of the tree line. Jake spotted the adult mountain lion moving like a shadow through the forest, his powerful body low to the ground in a stalking posture that Jake had never seen him use before. Guardian was clearly tracking something or someone, and his entire demeanor radiated controlled aggression. Jake's military surplus binoculars, a necessary tool for anyone living in such remote territory, revealed the target of Guardian's attention. Two men in camouflage clothing were moving through the forest, approximately 300 yards from Jake's cabin, and their behavior immediately confirmed Jake's worst suspicions about the cache he had discovered yesterday. The men carried themselves with the careful precision of people accustomed to moving undetected through wilderness areas. They stopped frequently to examine the ground, obviously following some kind of trail, and one of them carried what appeared to be a tracking device of some sort. Most disturbing of all, both men were clearly armed with more than just the tranquilizer, equipment Jake had found in their cache. Guardian shadowed the intruders from a distance, using the natural cover of rocks and trees to remain invisible while maintaining visual contact with the threat. Jake was impressed by the mountain lion's tactical intelligence. Guardian was gathering information about these humans, learning their capabilities and intentions before deciding how to respond to protect his family. Jake kept the cubs calm while observing the situation through his binoculars, but after about 20 minutes, the two men disappeared deeper into the forest, moving away from the cabin toward what Jake knew was a more remote section of the mountain range. Guardian continued to track them for several more minutes before returning to the vicinity of the cabin, though he remained hidden in the forest rather than resuming his usual visible position. The implications of what Jake had witnessed were deeply troubling. The men weren't simply moving through the area randomly, they were following specific trails and using tracking equipment which suggested they were hunting particular animals. Given Guardian's obvious familiarity with these intruders and his decision to bring his cubs to Jake's property for safety, it seemed likely that the mountain lion family was among their intended targets. Jake spent the morning researching wildlife, trafficking on his satellite internet connection, and what he learned made his stomach turn. Mountain lion cubs were valuable commodities in illegal exotic pet markets, often selling for tens of thousands of dollars each. Adult mountain lions were prized by private collectors and unscrupulous hunting operations that offered guaranteed hunts of magnificent predators in controlled environments. The professional-grade equipment Jake had discovered in the forest cache suddenly made perfect sense. These weren't casual poachers looking to make a quick profit from a single animal. This was a sophisticated operation targeting multiple high-value species throughout the Colorado wilderness, and they had clearly been working in this area long enough to identify specific animals worth pursuing. Guardian's rescue from the cliff now took on additional significance. The mountain lion's predicament might not have been an accident at all. If these traffickers had been tracking Guardian and his family, they might have set traps or created situations designed to weaken or isolate their targets. The fact that Guardian had been caught in such an unusual position, trapped between rocks in a way that seemed almost deliberate, suggested that human intervention might have been involved. As the day progressed, Jake made a series of disturbing discoveries around his property. Boot prints in the soft earth near his woodshed indicated that his cabin had been under surveillance, probably for several days. The prints were from the same heavy-duty hiking boots he had seen at the hidden cache, confirming that the traffickers knew about his unusual guests and were likely planning their next move. More alarming were the small electronic devices Jake found concealed in the forest around his property. They appeared to be motion-activated cameras, the kind used by hunters to monitor game trails, but their positioning suggested they were being used to observe Jake's cabin and document the presence of the mountain lion family. Someone had been building a detailed record of Guardian and his cubs' daily routines. The discovery of the surveillance equipment forced Jake to confront the reality that he was no longer simply an uninvolved observer of this situation. By providing sanctuary to Guardian's family, he had become an obstacle to the traffickers' plans, and that made him a potential target as well. People who invested this much time and money in illegal wildlife operations wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who interfered with their profits. That evening, Jake made the difficult decision to contact the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Department. While he was reluctant to bring official attention to his sanctuary, the evidence he had gathered painted a picture of a large-scale trafficking operation that posed a threat to wildlife throughout the region. This was bigger than just protecting Guardian and his cubs. This was about stopping criminals who were systematically devastating the local ecosystem. The conversation with Officer Sarah Martinez, a wildlife enforcement specialist with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, confirmed Jake's worst fears. The department had been investigating reports of missing wildlife in this region for several months, but they hadn't been able to identify the perpetrators or locate their base of operations. Jake's information about the hidden cache and surveillance equipment provided the first concrete leads in their investigation. Officer Martinez explained that wildlife trafficking had become increasingly sophisticated in recent years, with criminal organizations using technology and tactics that rivaled military operations. The traffickers Jake had encountered were likely part of a larger network that operated across multiple states, targeting rare and valuable species for international markets where exotic animals were prized as status symbols. As Jake ended his call with Officer Martinez, he realized that his quiet mountain retreat had become the center of a much larger conflict between those who sought to preserve wildlife and those who saw it only as a commodity to be harvested for profit. Guardian seemed to sense the change in Jake's mood and emerged from the forest to resume his protective position near the cabin. The mountain lion's golden eyes met Jake's, and in that moment, Jake understood that they had become true partners in protecting something precious. The cubs represented the future of their species in this wilderness, and the bond that had formed between Jake and Guardian was now the primary barrier standing between those vulnerable young lives and the people who would steal them away for profit. As darkness settled over the Colorado mountains, Jake prepared for what he sensed would be a pivotal confrontation. The traffickers knew their operation had been discovered, and they would have to act quickly before law enforcement could interfere. Tonight, the mountain sanctuary that had become a symbol of trust between species would be put to its ultimate test. Officer Sarah Martinez arrived at Jake's cabin just after dawn, accompanied by 2 additional wildlife enforcement officers and a specialist from the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service. Their unmarked vehicles had approached through backcountry logging roads to avoid detection, but even so, their arrival created a noticeable change in the atmosphere around the mountain sanctuary. Guardian had disappeared into the forest at the first sound of approaching vehicles. Though Jake suspected the mountain lion was watching from concealment, the 3 cubs had taken refuge under Jake's cabin porch, their natural wariness of unfamiliar humans overriding the trust they had developed with Jake over the past week. Officer Martinez was a compact woman in her 40s with the weathered look of someone who spent most of her time outdoors. Her colleagues, Officers David Chen and Rebecca Torres, brought portable surveillance equipment and evidence collection kits that indicated they were taking Jake's report very seriously. The federal agent, Special Agent Michael Harrison, carried additional authority to pursue the trafficking operation across state lines if necessary. Jake led the team to the hidden cache he had discovered, carefully retracing his steps from the previous day while explaining Guardian's behavior and the evidence of surveillance around his property. The officers documented everything with professional thoroughness, photographing the equipment and surroundings from multiple angles, while Agent Harrison coordinated with federal databases to trace the origin of the specialized capture devices. What they found at the cache site exceeded even Jake's expectations. Additional exploration revealed a second concealed area containing laptop computers, detailed maps of the region marked with animal locations, and communication equipment that suggested coordination with other trafficking operations. Most disturbing of all were the files containing photographs and behavioral notes about specific animals, including detailed documentation of Guardian and his cubs. Officer Martinez studied the surveillance photos with obvious anger. "These people have been watching your mountain lion family for weeks," she told Jake. "They know their daily routines, their preferred resting spots, even which cub has the injured paw. This level of preparation suggests they were planning to move very soon." Agent Harrison discovered additional evidence that painted an even more alarming picture. The laptop computers contained communications with buyers in several countries, including detailed requests for specific types of mountain lions and pricing information that confirmed Jake's research about the enormous profits involved in wildlife trafficking. Guardian's cubs, because of their young age and excellent health, would have been worth over $100,000 on the illegal market. The team spent several hours establishing a surveillance operation around Jake's property, using the traffickers' own equipment against them. Officer Chen, a technology specialist, reprogrammed the motion-activated cameras to send alerts to the enforcement team while appearing to function normally for anyone monitoring them remotely. Officer Torres positioned additional recording devices throughout the forest, creating a comprehensive monitoring network that would detect any approach to the cabin. As the officers worked, Jake noticed unusual activity from the wildlife around his property. Birds that had been absent during the morning's tension began returning to the area, and he could hear the familiar sounds of squirrels and other small animals resuming their normal activities. It was as if the forest itself recognized that protection had arrived. Around midday, Guardian made a remarkable decision that stunned everyone present. The mountain lion emerged from the forest and approached the group of humans working around Jake's cabin, moving with obvious caution, but without the defensive posturing Jake had expected. Guardian's golden eyes assessed each new person individually, as if evaluating their intentions toward his family and territory. Officer Martinez, who had decades of experience with wild animals, remained perfectly still as Guardian approached her position near the surveillance equipment. The mountain lion stopped about 10 feet away and sat down, his posture alert but non-threatening, as if he were participating in the planning session. Agent Harrison reached slowly for his camera, documenting this extraordinary interaction between a wild predator and law enforcement officers. "I've never seen anything like this," Officer Martinez whispered to Jake. "It's as if he understands that we're here to help protect his family. The intelligence in those eyes is remarkable." Jake felt a surge of pride in Guardian's judgment. The mountain lion had correctly identified the officers as allies rather than threats, demonstrating a level of strategic thinking that reinforced Jake's growing respect for the animal's capabilities. Guardian's presence also served as a powerful reminder of what they were fighting to protect. The afternoon brought the first sign that the traffickers were aware of law enforcement's involvement. Officer Chen's monitoring equipment detected electronic signals indicating that someone was attempting to remotely access the surveillance cameras around Jake's property. The signals were sophisticated, suggesting professional-grade hacking equipment, but the officers' modifications to the camera network allowed them to trace the source of the intrusion attempts. Agent Harrison coordinated with federal cybercrime specialists to track the electronic signatures, while Officer Torres prepared mobile units to investigate potential locations where the traffickers might be operating their control center. The speed and sophistication of the traffickers' response confirmed that this was indeed a large-scale operation. With significant resources and expertise, as evening approached, the team made a disturbing discovery. Analysis of the traffickers' communication logs revealed that Jake's property wasn't the only target in the region. The criminal network had been systematically documenting rare wildlife throughout several states, creating a database of valuable animals that could be harvested on demand for specific buyers. Guardian's family represented just one entry in a catalog of endangered and protected species that were being treated as merchandise. The scope of the operation explained why the traffickers had invested so heavily in surveillance and planning. They weren't simply opportunistic poachers, they were operating a sophisticated supply chain that connected wilderness areas with international markets for exotic animals. The federal investigation that Agent Harrison was coordinating would need to address trafficking networks spanning multiple continents. Jake's role in disrupting this operation had made him a significant threat to a criminal enterprise worth millions of dollars. Officer Martinez explained that the traffickers would likely attempt to eliminate the evidence of their activities in the area, which meant they might try to capture or harm Guardian's family before relocating their operation. The enforcement team was prepared for this possibility, but they needed Jake's cooperation to use his property as a base for their intervention. The three cubs emerged from their hiding spot under the porch as darkness fell, apparently reassured by Guardian's calm acceptance of the new humans on their territory. Officer Torres, who specialized in animal behavior, was amazed by the cubs' lack of natural fear and their obvious attachment to Jake. Their behavior confirmed that something had driven them to seek human protection, overriding millions of years of evolutionary instinct. Jake agreed to serve as bait for the traffickers, using his established routine to draw them into a confrontation while the officers maintained concealed positions around the property. The plan was risky, but it offered the best chance of catching the criminals in the act while protecting Guardian's family from harm. Agent Harrison emphasized that the federal investigation depended on gathering evidence of the traffickers' activities rather than simply driving them away to continue their operations elsewhere. As the team finalized their strategy, Jake noticed that Guardian had positioned himself where he could observe both the cabin and the forest approaches. The mountain lion seemed to understand that a confrontation was imminent, and he was prepared to defend his territory and family alongside his human allies. The night promised to bring the culmination of a week that had transformed Jake's quiet mountain retreat into the center of a battle between conservation and exploitation. The bond that had formed between Jake and Guardian had evolved into something larger, a partnership that represented the possibility of coexistence between humans and wildlife based on mutual respect rather than domination. Whatever happened in the hours ahead would determine not only the fate of Guardian's family, but also the future of wildlife protection throughout the entire region. The mountain sanctuary was about to become a battlefield, and Jake found himself standing at the center of a conflict that would test everything he believed about the relationship between humanity and the natural world. The confrontation began just after midnight, with the soft beeping of Officer Chen's motion detectors indicating movement in the forest around Jake's property. 3 distinct signals suggested multiple intruders approaching from different directions, a coordinated effort that confirmed the traffickers' professional training and tactical experience. Jake felt his heart rate accelerate as he moved through his cabin, following the predetermined plan while appearing to maintain his normal nighttime routine. Through his window, Jake could see Guardian's silhouette moving like a ghost through the moonlit forest, the mountain lion positioning himself to observe the approaching threats while remaining invisible to human eyes. The cubs had been secured in the cabin's small storage room, where they would be protected if the situation escalated beyond the enforcement team's control. Officer Martinez's voice crackled softly through Jake's earpiece, confirming that she had visual contact with two of the intruders. They were moving with night vision equipment and appeared to be carrying capture gear rather than traditional weapons, suggesting they intended to take Guardian and his cubs alive for maximum profit. Agent Harrison coordinated the response from his position, overlooking the main approach to the cabin, while Officer Torres monitored the electronic surveillance network for any additional threats. The first surprise came when the motion detectors revealed that the traffickers weren't alone. A fourth signal appeared on the monitoring equipment, moving independently from the coordinated group and approaching from an unexpected direction. Officer Chen's whispered update through the communication system indicated that this additional person was carrying different equipment and seemed to be tracking the original 3 intruders, rather than participating in their operation. Jake maintained his position by the cabin window, serving as the visible bait that would draw the traffickers into the open where the officers could apprehend them. But as he watched the forest, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Guardian was no longer visible in his usual observation positions, and there had been no sign of the mountain lion for several minutes. Jake tried to suppress his growing concern, reminding himself that Guardian's stealth abilities far exceeded anything the traffickers might possess. The answer to Guardian's whereabouts came in a dramatic fashion that none of the law enforcement team had anticipated. A sudden commotion erupted from the forest as one of the traffickers cried out in alarm, followed by the sound of equipment crashing through underbrush. Guardian had apparently decided to take direct action against the intruders, using his natural advantages to disrupt their approach before they could reach his family. Officer Martinez immediately abandoned her concealed position to provide backup, but what she found when she reached the source of the disturbance defied all expectations. Guardian had cornered one of the traffickers against a large boulder, the mountain lion's imposing presence enough to keep the man completely motionless. While Officer Martinez approached to make the arrest, the trafficker's night vision equipment and capture gear lay scattered around his feet, apparently dropped during his panicked retreat from Guardian's intervention. The second trafficker, realizing that their operation had been compromised, attempted to flee deeper into the forest but found his escape route blocked by Officer Torres. The coordination between the law enforcement team and Guardian's instinctive territorial defense created a perfect tactical situation that left the criminals with no avenue for escape. But the night's most significant revelation came when Agent Harrison confronted the mysterious fourth person who'd been tracking the traffickers. To everyone's amazement, the individual turned out to be Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a wildlife biologist from Colorado State University who had been conducting her own investigation into the trafficking operation. Dr. Rodriguez had been following the criminals for weeks, gathering evidence of their activities throughout the region. Dr. Rodriguez's research provided crucial context for the scope of the trafficking network. She had documented the disappearance of over 30 rare and endangered animals from Colorado wilderness areas over the past 6 months, including several mountain lion families, eagles, and even a black bear with cubs. The traffickers Jake had helped expose were part of a much larger criminal organization that was systematically depleting wildlife populations across the western United States. The interrogation of the captured traffickers revealed information that shocked even the experienced law enforcement officers. The criminal network included corrupt officials in multiple agencies, private collectors who paid premium prices for rare animals, and international smuggling routes that transported wildlife to buyers around the world. Guardian's family had been specifically targeted because of their exceptional health and the cubs' perfect age for training in captivity. Most disturbing of all was the revelation that the traffickers had been using increasingly sophisticated methods to capture their targets. The incident where Jake had rescued Guardian from the cliff had indeed been a trap designed to weaken the mountain lion so he could be easily captured along with his cubs. The traffickers had been frustrated by Guardian's escape and had spent days tracking the family to Jake's property. Officer Chen's analysis of the traffickers' electronic equipment revealed additional shocking information. The criminal network had been monitoring law enforcement communications in the region, allowing them to stay ahead of official investigations for months. They had known about the federal investigation almost from its inception, which explained their sophisticated counter-surveillance measures and preparation for eventual confrontation. The discovery of the communication monitoring explained why the traffickers had been so confident in their operations and why previous enforcement efforts had been unsuccessful. Agent Harrison immediately coordinated with federal cybercrime specialists to trace the source of the surveillance operation and identify additional members of the criminal network who had not yet been apprehended. As dawn broke over the Colorado mountains, the full scope of the night's success became clear. The arrest of the traffickers at Jake's property had provided law enforcement with access to the communication networks, equipment, and documentation needed to dismantle the entire regional trafficking operation. Dr. Rodriguez's research, combined with the evidence gathered by the enforcement team, painted a comprehensive picture of criminal activities that spanned multiple states and involved dozens of participants. Guardian emerged from the forest as the officers completed their evidence collection, the mountain lion's calm demeanor suggesting that he understood the threat to his family had been eliminated. The cubs burst from their hiding place in the cabin storage room, immediately seeking attention from both Jake and Guardian, while showing remarkable resilience in the face of the night's excitement. Dr. Rodriguez was particularly fascinated by the relationship that had developed between Jake and the mountain lion family. Her professional expertise in animal behavior confirmed that Guardian's decision to bring his cubs to Jake's property represented an unprecedented level of interspecies trust and cooperation. The documentation of this relationship would provide valuable insights for wildlife conservation efforts throughout the region. Agent Harrison explained that the federal investigation would continue for months as law enforcement agencies worked to identify and apprehend all members of the trafficking network. The evidence gathered at Jake's property had provided the breakthrough that investigators needed to pursue the criminal organization across state and international boundaries. But perhaps the most significant outcome of the night's events was the recognition that Jake's mountain sanctuary had become something unique in wildlife conservation. The trust that Guardian had placed in Jake and Jake's willingness to risk his own safety to protect the mountain lion family had created a model for human-wildlife coexistence that challenged traditional assumptions about the relationship between civilization and nature. As the law enforcement team prepared to leave Jake's property with their prisoners and evidence, Officer Martinez made an unexpected announcement. The Colorado Parks and Wildlife Department wanted to establish Jake's property as an official wildlife sanctuary, recognizing the extraordinary success of his approach to conservation and providing legal protection for the unique relationship he had developed with the local ecosystem. The morning sun illuminated a transformed landscape where the threat of trafficking had been replaced by the promise of protection and where the bond between a man and a mountain lion family had evolved into something that would inspire conservation efforts for years to come. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Jake Harrison stood on his cabin porch, watching Patch and his siblings explore their expanded territory with the confident playfulness of young mountain lions who had never known fear. The 3 cubs had grown substantially, their spotted coats giving way to the solid, tawny color of adolescent cougars, but they maintained the remarkable trust in humans that had made their story famous throughout the conservation community. Guardian rested in his favorite spot beneath the large pine tree, his golden eyes surveying the bustling activity that had transformed Jake's once quiet mountain retreat into the Harrison Wildlife Sanctuary. The official designation had brought funding, legal protection, and a small team of dedicated researchers who studied the unprecedented relationship between Jake and the mountain lion family while working to replicate similar success stories. Throughout Colorado, Dr. Elena Rodriguez had become the sanctuary's head researcher, dividing her time between documenting Guardian's family dynamics and training other wildlife specialists in Jake's approach to building trust with large predators. Her published papers about the sanctuary had attracted international attention from conservationists seeking new models for human-wildlife coexistence in an increasingly crowded world. The transformation of Jake's property had been remarkable, but carefully planned to minimize disruption to Guardian's comfort and territorial instincts. A state-of-the-art research facility had been constructed on the far side of the clearing, designed to blend seamlessly with the natural environment, while providing the technology needed for comprehensive wildlife monitoring. Hiking trails allowed controlled public access for educational purposes, but Guardian's immediate territory around Jake's cabin remained strictly protected. Jake had discovered that his role as Guardian's human partner had evolved into something he never could have imagined during his years as a solitary wildlife photographer. He was now officially designated as a wildlife conservation specialist with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, a position created specifically to recognize his unique abilities and provide a framework for expanding sanctuary programs throughout the state. The success of the Harrison Wildlife Sanctuary had attracted animals beyond Guardian's family. A pair of golden eagles had established a nest in the tall pines overlooking the research facility, apparently drawn by the protected status and abundant prey in the area. A family of black bears made regular appearances during berry season, showing none of the wariness typically associated with their species when encountering human activity. Most remarkably, word of the sanctuary had somehow spread through the local wildlife community in ways that scientists still didn't fully understand. Injured animals began appearing on Jake's property with increasing frequency, as if they understood that this was a place where humans provided help rather than harm. Jake had become an informal wildlife rehabilitation specialist, working closely with veterinarians to treat everything from broken wings to infected wounds. The federal investigation into the trafficking network had exceeded all expectations, resulting in arrests across 12 states and the recovery of over 200 animals that had been destined for illegal markets. Agent Harrison, now a frequent visitor to the sanctuary, credited Jake's willingness to become involved as the catalyst that had finally broken open a criminal organization that had operated with impunity for years. The traffickers who had targeted Guardian's family received substantial prison sentences, but more importantly, the dismantling of their network had eliminated the immediate threat to wildlife throughout the region. Other trafficking operations had apparently decided that Colorado was too risky for their activities, creating an unprecedented period of safety for the state's endangered and rare species. Jake's relationship with Guardian had continued to evolve. in ways that challenged scientific understanding of predator behavior. The mountain lion had begun bringing Jake gifts, unusual rocks or interesting pieces of wood that seemed to serve as tokens of appreciation or friendship. Guardian would also seek out Jake's company during his evening patrols, walking alongside the human as if they were partners surveying their shared territory. The cub's development had provided Dr. Rodriguez with invaluable insights into mountain lion learning and socialization. Patch, the smallest of the three, had become particularly attached to Jake and would often sleep curled up on the cabin porch like an oversized house cat. His siblings maintained more typical wild behavior, but showed none of the fear of humans that would normally characterize their species. Educational programs at the sanctuary had attracted thousands of visitors, including school groups, conservation organizations, and government officials from other states seeking to implement similar programs. Jake found himself giving presentations about his experiences, sharing the lessons he had learned about building trust with wildlife through patience, respect, and genuine care for their well-being. The economic impact of the sanctuary had surprised everyone involved. The combination of research grants, educational programs, and ecotourism had brought significant revenue to the local community, while demonstrating that wildlife conservation could be economically sustainable. Several neighboring property owners had applied to establish their own protected areas, creating a network of sanctuaries throughout the mountain region. Jake's photography had taken on new meaning as well. His documentation of Guardian's family had become the foundation for conservation campaigns worldwide, with his images used to promote wildlife protection and anti-trafficking efforts across multiple continents. The trust evident in his photographs had touched people around the world, generating support for conservation programs far beyond Colorado. As autumn painted the aspens in brilliant gold and orange, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought him from isolated wildlife photographer to internationally recognized conservation leader. The morning when he had first heard Guardian's desperate call from the cliff seemed like a lifetime ago, but the bond forged during that rescue continued to strengthen with each passing day. The three cubs, now approaching their first birthday, were beginning to show signs of the independence that would eventually lead them to establish their own territories. But Dr. Rodriguez's research suggested that their early experiences at the sanctuary had created behavioral patterns that would make them more likely to coexist peacefully with humans throughout their lives. Guardian himself showed no signs of wanting to leave the sanctuary, apparently content to serve as both protector and ambassador for his species. His presence had become a symbol of hope for conservationists worldwide, proof that humans and apex predators could share the same space when mutual respect replaced fear and exploitation. As Jake settled into his evening routine, checking on the research equipment and ensuring that all sanctuary systems were functioning properly, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment that his years of solitary mountain living had never provided. The simple act of helping one animal in distress had grown into a movement that was changing how people thought about wildlife conservation. Guardian appeared at the edge of the forest, as he did every evening, ready to begin his nocturnal patrol of the territory they now shared. Patch and his siblings emerged from their resting spots to greet both Jake and their father, the perfect picture of a family that had found safety and prosperity in the most unlikely of circumstances. The mountain sanctuary stood as proof that compassion could triumph over exploitation, that understanding could replace fear, and that the relationship between humans and wildlife could be one of partnership rather than domination. In saving Guardian's family, Jake had discovered his own purpose, and together they had created something beautiful that would inspire conservation efforts for generations to come. Dear viewers, we hope Jake and Guardian's incredible story has moved you as much as it moved us to share it. This tale of unexpected friendship and conservation shows us that sometimes the most profound changes begin with a single act of compassion. If you found yourself captivated by this journey of trust between man and mountain lion, we have prepared a special playlist of equally inspiring stories that explore the remarkable connections between humans and the natural world. You can find this collection by clicking on the link to your left. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique narratives that celebrate the complexity and beauty of life in all its forms. Don't miss our upcoming content, and we look forward to seeing you in the comments section where you can share your own thoughts about this extraordinary bond between Jake and Guardian. Your engagement helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of hope, conservation, and the incredible relationships that can develop when we open our hearts to the natural world around us.